So now that we are learning more about chords and chord function, I want to talk to you a little bit about how chords can move from one to another, as well as how they can be voiced. So we are looking at the chord motion and voicing guide that I've posted on Moodle, and I'm going to walk you through a few key concepts from this about chord positions and about chord motion. To begin, we look at example 1 from this guide that goes over the 3 different chord positions that are available to us. These are close, neutral, and open. Closed position chords mean that there is less than an octave between the soprano voice and the tenor voice. In this example I've given, which sounds like this, we have a sixth between the tenor and the soprano. Neutral position features an octave, exactly an octave, between the tenor and the soprano. Here's our tenor on A, and then the soprano above it on A to form the octave. Then, when we have more than an octave between tenor and soprano, we call the chord position open. In this case, we have A3 as the tenor and C#5 as the soprano. Still, notice that whenever we have an open position chord, we still do not have more than an octave between any of the adjacent 3 upper voices. For example, there's just a sixth between the soprano and alto, and a fifth between alto and tenor. Also, for the record, you can have more than an octave between tenor and bass. That's never a problem. The other concept I want to convey to you are the different types of chord motion that we can use. So rather than just thinking about one individual vertical chord, we are thinking about how we connect one chord to the next chord. That is chord motion. And we have 4 types of chord motion: parallel, similar, oblique, and contrary. Let me show you how those work. Now I'm looking at example 2 from the chord motion and voicing guide. Parallel motion means that you move 2 voices in the same direction by the same interval. If we look at example 2, we have a tenth or compound third going to another tenth or compound third. And both parts are moving in the same direction. That is parallel motion. Similar motion occurs when 2 voices move in the same direction. In this case, they're both going up, but they're moving by a different interval. And the successive intervals we get here are a 12th to a 13th, or you could think of it as a compound 5th to a compound 6th. Oblique motion is very easy to identify because one part is stationary while the other part moves. In this case, the top voice is the stationary one, staying on C, and the bass voice is moving. You can never go wrong using oblique motion when you do part writing. And lastly, we want to go over what contrary motion is. And this occurs when both voices move in opposite directions. That means the top voice can go down while the lower voice goes up, or the top voice would go up while the lower voice goes down. This example sounds like this. I'd like to conclude this video by talking a little bit about some things we want to avoid when we are connecting chords. Example 3 shows you some examples of successive perfect fifths and octaves. We want to avoid these when we are doing part writing because they obscure the independence of the parts. Voice leading is a balancing act between making lovely voiced sounding vertical chords, but also having interesting independent melodies in each of the 4 voices. So if we have a harmonic perfect fifth between 2 successive voices and they both move in the same direction by that perfect fifth or perfect octave, they start to kind of meld together, and we want to preserve their independence. That's why contrary and oblique motion works so well. So this first example, we have a compound perfect fifth between F and C. And the issue is that both parts move up by step to form another perfect fifth. Well, those parts kind of meld together, and this is something we want to avoid. Don't do it. We can also have perfect fifths that look like contrary motion, and it is contrary motion, but it's still a fifth to a fifth. Take a look at the next example. F to C, there's our fifth, compound fifth. Well, instead of having the bass go up to G, it's going to leap down by a seventh to G. But it's still compound fifth to compound fifth. That we also want to avoid. The same principle applies and is probably even more evident orally with the perfect octaves. We want to avoid successive perfect octaves. And the 2 examples I have here of those sound like this. It almost sounds like the same thing, right? You also want to avoid successive perfect octaves that move by contrary motion. Sometimes those can be hard to identify, but it still sounds like the same tune. So avoid that as well. The last idea I want to bring to your attention is a slight difference between when we have a perfect fifth going to a diminished fifth versus 2 successive perfect fifths. So this is where quality of interval really does matter. Notice this first one, we have a perfect fifth, compound perfect fifth between C and G. Well, we see that we have a fifth it goes to, but it's not perfect. It's diminished. And sometimes we're going to need to do this. So it's absolutely okay to do this. What we want to avoid is when we have successive perfect fifths or successive perfect octaves. The example of parallel fifths, which we want to avoid, is shown here. Perfect fifth to perfect fifth. Again, nope, don't do it. At this time, we don't really need to concern ourselves with the other 2 examples of direct fifths and direct octaves. That's just there for your reference. So that's a little bit to get our feet wet with chord motion and chord voicing. I've got some exercises for you to do to start to get familiar with these concepts.